At 7:30 a.m. on the 23rd of January 2026, just after the US and NATO reached a framework agreement on access rights in Greenland, the Kremlin convened an emergency meeting and concluded that its greatest threat was not coming from Ukraine, but from 2,200 miles to the north, as the United States increased its military presence in Greenland to tighten its Arctic posture and contain China, confident they had locked down. Kyiv, Russia pulled its best air defense assets out of Crimea and redeployed them to the high north, upgrading radar and bases on Franz Josef land and Novaya Zemlya, and expanding a surveillance network looking from Greenland toward Russia. They gambled that Ukraine wouldn't realize, in time, the gap that had just opened in the skies over the Black Sea. But they were wrong. NATO electronic intelligence aircraft immediately detected the radio silence. A brief encrypted signal was sent back to Kyiv and the counterstrike plan was activated. Just 100 feet off the coast of Crimea, Ukraine answered that radio silence with a ghost, but not one appearing from the sky. This one skimmed across the surface of the sea. A Magura V5 unmanned surface drone hugged the waves, leaving almost no trace. But this wasn't the familiar kind of suicide strike. Inside its compartment were 4 fiber-optic FPV Vampire FP5 drones, the kind that can keep a stable link even under heavy jamming. They moved in quietly, aimed straight at the heart of Russia's naval drone base in Novorossiysk. At the exact moment the guards were still fixated on the situation in the north, convinced the real threat was somewhere else. The Arctic diversion had opened a door. But to turn that opening into a killing blow, Magura still had to do the one thing that mattered most: drop its payload at precisely the right moment. At 6:30 a.m., the Magura V5 left a secret base in Odessa, accelerating to around 50 miles per hour. It skimmed close to the coastline, following the route from Odessa toward the port of Novorossiysk. The key detail was that the entire run was guided by an inertial navigation system, maintaining radio silence and leaving no signal trail. But the sea didn't cooperate. Waves rising to nearly 5 feet not only helped conceal the craft, they also slammed into its payload bay again and again. Each surge was another test, threatening to soak and cripple the electronics inside. For the operator in Odessa, it became a race with nerves stretched tight, constant micro-corrections, fighting drift and current, just to keep this ghost locked onto its intended track. But on the Black Sea, stealth is often just an illusion, especially when you're up against Russia's Nebo-M coastal radar system. This is a massive surveillance machine, capable of tracking even ultra-high-speed targets at ranges of up to 250 miles. In theory, the Magura V5 is too small and rides too close to the surface for radar to get a clean return. But rough seas created a different problem. The weight of this unmanned surface vehicle distorted the wave patterns, leaving behind an anomaly the radar could spot, like a telltale trace, a brief digital scratch across the operator's display. It wasn't a solid lock, but it was enough to trigger the warning system aboard the patrol ship Vasily Baikov 368, a Project 22160 vessel guarding the outer perimeter. The captain didn't hesitate. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew it didn't belong in these waters. Moments later, the deck of Vasily Baikov 368 flared with light. A Kamov Ka-27 Helix was ordered into the air, its rotor wash whipping through salty, damp air as it surged into the sea fog to hunt the shadow that had just appeared on the screen. This was the Hunter helicopter in the pair. It dipped its nose and surged toward the anomaly at around 150 miles per hour, ready to drop an RGB NM-1 Sonoboy into the water. The buoy would float on the surface and use sound waves to detect and localize submarines or underwater targets, listening for the distinctive acoustic signature of an engine and turning it into tracking data. On the Ukrainian side, the operator immediately saw the telemetry spike as the helicopter closed in. Under standard logic, this is the moment where you either turn around or you die. But he didn't turn back. He activated dive mode. With a single keystroke, he flooded the ballast compartments of the Magura V5, forcing it deeper until the deck was washed under leaving only the communications antennas and the camera package exposed above the surface, just enough to keep eyes on the situation and maintain the link. At the same time, the comm system switched over to a mesh radio network. And when the Russians began blasting jamming signals from above, the Magura didn't try to overpower the interference, it changed how it survived inside it. Its control signal started frequency hopping roughly 500 times per second, slipping through the noise like a needle through fabric, keeping the connection alive at the most dangerous moment. The water dancers immediately dove into the sea, but all they could hear was the steady crash of the waves. The Magura had dissolved into that sound, invisible, silent, moving like a shadow. And while they were still searching in the dark, it had already slipped up to the harbor entrance, now only 65 feet away. The trap had been waiting all along. At exactly 6:58 a.m., the Magura V5 reached the end of its run, positioned precisely 65 feet off the coast of Novorossiysk. The operator sent a single pulse command. Instantly, the sleek sea drone began to shift, like a machine waking up on schedule. Hydraulic actuators shrieked as the top panels snapped open. Inside, a pneumatic launch rail was revealed, compact, sharp, and cold like a statement. This was the moment the ghost ship stopped being just an infiltrator and became the smallest aircraft carrier in the world. Then it happened in rapid succession. 4 Vampire FP5 drones shot into the dawn sky, one after another. Their rotors screamed as they stabilized at roughly 200 feet, locking into formation ready to trigger the next phase of the strike. But these weren't ordinary drones. Trailing from the tail of each one was an ultra-thin fiber-optic cable, a strand of glass thinner than a human hair, keeping them tethered to the mothercraft behind them, almost immune to jamming. At the same time, onshore, Russia's air defenses finally came alive. Inside a Pantsir S-1 vehicle, the radar operator watched 4 low-altitude targets bloom on his screen like angry welts. He didn't hesitate for a second. The Pantsir, a $15 million machine built to hunt cruise missiles, slowly lowered its turret and locked on. Then it fired. A 57 E6 missile tore off the launcher, accelerating to Mach 3 inches just 2 seconds. At that speed, there's no evasive equation a drone can solve fast enough. The interceptor caught the lead drone at a range of 12 miles, detonated its fragmentation warhead, and turned the plastic aircraft into a cloud of debris. One was down, but there were still 3 more. The Russian operator smirked. That was only the opening act. He switched on the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system, unleashing a brutal jamming wave powerful enough to paralyze every radio link across the Black Sea area. In his mind, the outcome was obvious. The 3 remaining drones would lose signal and drop from the sky like birds blown off course in a blizzard. But they didn't fall because the Russians didn't know Ukraine was using fiber-optic controlled FPV drones, a technology that's nearly immune to electronic jamming. Instead of relying on radio waves traveling through open air, these drones transmit commands as light through a physical fiber line. That made every attempt to jam radio frequencies meaningless. While Russia's interference spread into empty air, Ukrainian pilots kept watching crisp 1080p video live, with near-zero latency. On their screens, a modern warship sat ready for combat. The Ukrainian operators moved. They flew the drones in a weaving S pattern. 2 suddenly split left and right, acting as decoys, deliberately scrambling the fire control system of the Sovereign, anchored near the port of Novorossiysk on air defense duty. At the same time, the 3rd drone, the real hunter, dropped lower, hugged the sea surface, and drove straight toward the target. The Sovereign responded instantly. Its automated twin-barrel AK-100 and 3130mm naval gun roared, shredding the air with dense bursts as it chased the decoys in the sky. But the sheer number of targets and signals hitting at once pushed the system into overload. In the middle of electronic chaos and thick defensive fire, the Hunter drone kept closing. No hesitation, no slowdown. And in a single heartbeat, it slammed directly into the spinning radar dish on the Sovereign and detonated an 11-pound armor-piercing warhead, ending the fight by striking the enemy's air defense eye. The explosion didn't destroy the ship, but it shattered its entire antenna system, instantly blinding the giant. A billion-dollar warship was reduced to a heavy, expensive slab of steel with a dead radio, like an elite marksman suddenly forced to fight without sight. And in that moment, the remaining drones slipped past the first layer of air defense. At 7 a.m., the Russian base commander realized the Sovremeny was simply too large and cumbersome to hunt down the Magura V5 mothership. So he decided to play his ace. The discovery of fiber-optic controlled drones meant one thing: there had to be a fixed launch platform nearby. He immediately ordered a Vasily Baikov-class patrol ship, Project 22160, to sortie and track the mothership. The 1,400-ton vessel, built specifically for counter-sabotage operations, burst out of the harbor at 30 knots. Its bow split the water like a sledgehammer searching for a nail. Magura V5 was now trapped in a brutal dilemma. It couldn't maneuver to escape without snapping the thin, glass-like fiber-optic lines that kept the swarm under control. The small craft became a fragile target, drifting helplessly on the waves as the patrol ship closed in. Then the 5mm machine guns opened fire, turning the sea's surface into a white, lethal wall. The Ukrainian operator aboard faced a binary choice: save the boat or sacrifice a pawn to protect the entire operation. He chose the latter. Drone number 3 was pulled from the main strike group and redirected to intercept the interceptor. What followed became a physically unfair fight. Russian gunners were trying to hit a target the size of a dinner plate, moving at nearly 90 miles per hour while bucking over rough water, an assignment as absurd as trying to drill a hummingbird out of the sky with a concrete drill. Tracer lines screamed past the camera lens harmlessly as Drone 3 ignored the suppressive fire and committed to a straight, vertical dive. The impact was precise to the millimeter. The drone-shaped bomb detonated against the reinforced glass of the command deck. It didn't sink the ship, but the overpressure inside the sealed cabin instantly stunned the crew on the bridge and wrecked critical control systems. The patrol ship suddenly veered hard to port, its rudder jammed, its crew incapacitated. A heavy support asset had just been neutralized by a flying plastic toy, leaving the harbor entrance wide open for the final 2 drones to push through and finish the job. At 7:04 a.m., the Russian command center hit a dead end. With radar effectively blinded and the patrol ship damaged, panic set in and they authorized a scorched earth solution. From Krimsk Air Base, roughly 30 miles from the port of Novorossiysk, a tactical Iskander-M ballistic missile shot up into the stratosphere. This is a weapon built to flatten entire city blocks, now being used to hunt a single composite boat. The $3 million missile plunged down at around Mach 6, slamming into the last estimated coordinates of the Magura V5 with enough kinetic force to vaporize a destroyer. A column of seawater erupted 200 feet into the air, shaking the ocean floor. But the strike was a catastrophic failure. Because the Magura V5 had already completed its launch cycle, it had drifted away silent and cold miles from the impact zone. At that point, it wasn't even a ship anymore. It was just a floating spool platform, and the hair-thin glass fibers immune to jamming were still intact. Inside the base, the situation flipped from organized defense to total chaos. Russian electronic warfare officers pushed their jammers to maximum output, unleashing an electromagnetic storm so violent it could probably scramble their own equipment along with everything else. On any other day, that would have made every drone within 10 miles drop out of the sky like drunk birds. But today, physics was wearing Ukraine's jersey. The fiber-optic links acted like a rigid tunnel through the interference, carrying crisp 1080p video with near-zero latency. The operator in Odessa wasn't fighting static. He was watching a high-definition livestream of Russia's incompetence. Through the drone's lens, the panic on the ground becomes frighteningly clear. Russian naval infantry squads swing their AK-12 seconds skyward and fire in unison, pouring out a non-stop storm of rounds that turns into a chaotic curtain of lead. But trying to knock a fast-maneuvering FPV drone out of the air with rifles is like trying to hit a rolling marble on a ship's deck in the middle of a raging storm, nearly hopeless. The remaining Pantsir S1 fares no better. Its radar is thrown off by ground clutter and the drone's weak return off its plastic body, making the system rotate its turret awkwardly, searching, hesitating, still unable to lock the target. Meanwhile, the agile FPV drones weave through bright tracer streaks cutting the air, bank hard over the burning wreck of the patrol boat, and then surge straight toward the port's main complex. The operator doesn't waste attention on the soldiers scattering for cover. His target is far bigger than that. The camera feed zooms in. At the heart of Novorossiysk port, a reinforced concrete structure comes into view, the primary missile and ammunition storage facility. Its blast door has been left open after a rushed early morning inspection. According to intelligence, this is where missiles and munitions are kept for warships and air defense units, including rounds intended for systems like the S-400. Inside, the drone's camera captures stacks of high-explosive warheads piled beside unshielded aviation fuel containers. The Russians, without meaning to, have turned the place into a giant powder keg. The lead drone trims its approach, slips through the open doorway at roughly 60 miles per hour. Every outer layer of defense has failed. Earlier strikes could miss, but this needle has gone straight into the weak point. At 7:09 a.m., the signal from the lead drone steadies for the final phase. It transmits 10 seconds of the last images of its existence with cold, surgical clarity before everything ahead of the frame disappears. The missile storage bunker loomed like a colossal bag of concrete and steel, a place built to store and load caliber cruise missiles onto warships and submarines. The ammunition depots at Novorossiysk now function as a logistical hub, replacing Sevastopol, storing and preparing caliber missiles for the Black Sea Fleet's continued strikes against Ukraine. At the same time, it serves as a strategic anchor that helps Russia maintain maritime control and protect critical energy export routes from enemy attacks in the Black Sea. Through the lens, the chaos on the ground seemed to slow down in a strangely unnatural way. Russian guards realized their rifles were useless, and they panicked, shoving their way through cargo stacks and fuel pipelines, sprinting toward the exits in a desperate retreat. One officer stood frozen, staring straight at the missile warehouse burning in front of him, his gaze locked in helpless disbelief. On his face was the dawning understanding that his career, and perhaps his entire life, was ending here, inside this blurred, collapsing mess. The operator in Odessa narrowed his focus to a single point. Pale gray cylindrical tubes stacked tightly against the back wall of the hangar. Intelligence confirmed they were caliber cruise missile transport containers. Inside were sealed component modules, from propulsion sections to warhead assemblies, ready for the final stage of installation. The danger was that they had been placed far too close to a pallet piled high with aviation fuel drums and maintenance solvents. It was a layout so reckless that even a tiny spark could turn the entire area into a chain reaction fuse. If a direct strike landed, the outcome would no longer be damage, it would be catastrophe. The drone shot through the hangar threshold and dropped to barely 1.5 meters above the concrete floor. Outside, violent gusts from the burning patrol ship slapped against its body, but the fiber-optic line remained taut like an unbreakable tendon. On the screen, the distance indicators plummeted as if in free fall. 200 yards, 100 yards. Everything ahead became vividly, almost unrealistically clear warning text, printed on caliber containers, shipment batch codes, rust freckles on fuel drums, and the terrified eyes of a mechanic who turned his head and instantly dove for cover. No electronic countermeasure had time to appear. No jammed signal could save this moment, and no prayer could negotiate with the laws of physics. Right here, a $250,000 ghost boat and its glass thread-controlled bees had slipped through a defense network worth billions just to touch the one spot where, if struck correctly, the entire caliber storage area and the fuel beside it would turn into its own death sentence. The screen filled with the steel gray faces of caliber containers, and then the image cut out. But that was only the end of the signal. The physical reaction was just beginning. The FPV's 10.4 kilogram warhead slammed into the staging point at roughly 90 miles per hour, delivering an extremely concentrated penetration like a thermal drill boring straight into the heart of the stockpile. The first blast wasn't huge. It didn't even rip the concrete floor apart, but it was the spark in exactly the right place for what was truly dangerous nearby. Propellant charges, propulsion modules, and explosive materials tied to the caliber chain. Within milliseconds, the adjacent containers detonated in a cascading chain reaction, and the nearby pallet of aviation fuel essentially vaporized on the spot. A wave of heat and overpressure surged through the hangar, bending reinforced steel wall panels like metal overheated past its limit. The roof weighing tons was thrown upward nearly 300 feet into the air, inside a pillar of fire visible from miles away. The shockwave blasted outward, flattening the perimeter fencing and shoving the burning patrol ship's wreck up onto the shore like a discarded toy. In just 30 seconds, a logistics complex worth more than $100 million became a crater-twisted steel everywhere, shattered concrete, and hot smoke still hanging in the air. But the physical damage is still nothing compared to the psychological shock this strike leaves behind. For Russia's Black Sea Fleet, it feels like the final blow to the one thing they had left: confidence. Before this, they lost their flagship Moskva to Neptune missiles. Then they watched ships like the Ivanovets and Caesar Kunikov get taken out by sea drones. And now the worst part. Even the base that was built to protect them from drones has been breached. From this moment on, Russian command slips into a paralyzing sense of being surrounded. They're no longer fighting an enemy, they can clearly see they're fighting a ghost. Something they can't spot, can't jam, and can't figure out how to stop. The message from Kyiv is cold enough to raise goosebumps. There is no safe harbor, not out at sea, not inside port, and not behind those billion-dollar electronic warfare walls. Geopolitically, this is a straight punch to the Kremlin. Remember that Greenland gamble at the beginning? Putin pivoted to the Arctic, thinning defenses in the south to project global strength. But instead of proving power, he proved the opposite. Russia is overextended by imperial ambition. They tried to posture against NATO in the north and got humiliated by a home-built naval force in the south. This also exposes an uncomfortable truth Western analysts have suspected for months. Russia's military is a beast with long arms, but a vulnerable core. And if you look at it through an economic lens, the picture gets even scarier for Moscow. Ukraine needed only one Magura mothership and 4 modified mini-drones, with a total cost of around $250,000. In return, they disrupted a logistics hub worth tens to hundreds of millions, crippled operations across an entire area, and turned a layered defense system into a public embarrassment, an investment that would make even Wall Street blush. Today's lesson is simple. In modern war, innovation often beats hardware. You can own the strongest radars, the biggest missiles, and the thickest defense network, but if you can't stop a tiny drone running on glass wire, then you've already lost at the level of thinking. Russia built a fortress meant to stop an army, and forgot to close the window when the bees flew in. So here's the question for you. Now that fiber-optic drones that are nearly impossible to jam are here, does the Black Sea Fleet still have a future? Or is it just a lineup of floating targets waiting their turn? Drop your prediction in the comments below. And if you want to see what happens when Ukrainian engineering collides with Russian arrogance again, make sure you subscribe. Goodbye.